Hello, everybody, and I'm really pleased that there are still some very strong people interested in foreign policy. My name is Charlotte Pedersen. I'm the director of the Danish Foreign Policy Society, and the sort of the main mission of the Danish Foreign Policy Society is to have debates and informative debates about foreign policy. So we actually carry out 70 debates a year, both in the form of webinars and in form of meetings and all kind, on different topical issues which are important for Danish foreign policy and foreign policy in general. And this panel, very interesting panel, is about the nation state. Is it still relevant when you look at it from a security perspective? I think that's very, very interesting. I've worked a lot about nation states, and many times we've said, you know, the nation state is not relevant anymore. We are part of the EU, and what is it? But is the nation still relevant? And is actually the nation state what is also, what you could say, what Ukraine is fighting for? It's nation state, and what is a nation state in general? But in the past, nation states have been in charge of their own security policies, often alongside memberships of NATO. The recent geopolitical situation in Europe has made many re-question the fact, can we on the level of each and every nation state actually carry out security on our own, or do we always need to be in alliance with others through the EU or through NATO? So this will be the core of the debate tonight, and for this I have some very competent people. I have Gatis, Eglitis, Minister of Welfare of Latvia. I have Ilhan Kyuchyuk from the ALDE party, co-president and member of parliament in the European Parliament, and Ambassador Nata Menabde, Ambassador of Georgia. So welcome very much. Actually, I will do as we did prior, give you the opportunity to give a sort of a short presentation of your viewpoint on this issue, on this question, how you see it. And I'd like we start from Minister of Welfare of Latvia, Gatis Eglitis, if you could provide. I know that the security perspective and security issues are very much at the fore of Latvia at the moment, as you nearly with the borders to Russia and everything.
Exactly, and thank you very much for this for the invitation to this event, and also Jan Bertelsen, the CEO of this great initiative festival, for bringing us here together and raising this investment in democratic debate, democratic thinking and also on European topics. I think this is something that we need, especially now in these crazy times. About myself, maybe briefly, I'm Minister for Social Affairs, basically welfare, which is social employment, gender equality, family, people with disabilities. But my background is actually, I'm also security background. So I've worked with NATO issues, and I've worked in the foreign ministry in Latvia on security relations. So I know a bit, so to say. And also, of course, as a country, we are next doors to an aggressive and dangerous neighbor. So we live, I would say, with some degree of uneasiness, or maybe even sometimes fear, next to our big neighbor, the three Baltic states. Well, what I can say is that, of course, our big achievement in security terms, of course, has been NATO, and we have staked our security on NATO. I would say 100%. We see that NATO is the right instrument, the right tool to protect small countries like Latvia, the Baltic states, against any potential aggressors. And Article 5 has served its purpose more than 70 years, has prevented military aggression. So we are, I would say, fortunate. We're happy to be of NATO, and of course that requires also a lot of investment on our side. We cannot only depend on collective security, we have to do our homework at work as well, at home, strengthen our internal security, because sometimes you don't need military aggression to capture a country. Sometimes it can happen from within. If you have a weak society, a not resilient society, it can be manipulated, it can be vulnerable. So, thank you.
Yeah, maybe just an additional question to you. So how do you see the role of the EU as a security provider to Latvia, for example?
Unfortunately, we don't see EU as a sort of in sort of military terms, that EU could come up with a good functioning military defense model. There's a lot of talk in Brussels, you know, that we need to build sort of common, I don't know, army, whatever forces, but we don't believe in that simply. And I think now also in seeing now what happens after the Russian aggression in Ukraine, the EU sort of sometimes, especially the big EU countries, I don't think they were up to task. EU is very good, of course, for building, as I said, the resilience of the society, and that is, of course, needed. EU is strong in sort of building economy, market economy, social standards, a lot of what is needed to have a successful state, a successful country. But EU should not really go into sort of military affairs.
Do you think that, just an additional, just to pursue this topic, do you think that if Ukraine had been member of the EU, not NATO, but member of the EU, would Russia have attacked, invaded Ukraine?
I don't think so, no.
No. So in that terms, just the fact that you're a member of the club could actually be detection or deter an aggressive state in itself.
I believe so.
Yes, thank you. So next presenter, Mr. Ilhan Kyuchyuk.
Well, when I was in the Euro organization, the Liberal Euro organization, and the Brits were about to leave, we always had these talks with them. Even we initiated a campaign. Better is in is better than out. And working for a long time with Eastern Partnership countries, but also specifically with countries coming from the Western Balkans, I know that sitting outside is freezing. And we understand that as Bulgarians, this country joined European Union in 2007 and NATO in 2004. One thing is sure, I don't want to argue with the book called Why Nation States Fail, but just to make a point that nation states doesn't fail because they have strategic priorities like being in NATO and European Union, and they follow the aspiration of their own citizens. They fail for different reasons, and usually, as we see recently, they're attacked by bully powers. It happened for Georgia in 2008, happened to Crimea in 2014, and European Union, in a way, the entire West was kind of absent from the consequences of that attack, be it in Georgia or be it in Crimea. I hope this time European Union and the entire West will be more resilient, and we will remember Crimea, Georgia, Ukraine for more than 4 months, because this is a battle between good and bad. This is a battle between evil and angel, and we have to choose sides. And I do believe that European Union can do a lot of things. First, to give a strong perspective to the countries. We granted Ukraine with candidate status, and I want European Union to continue doing it with Georgia and with Moldova, because it is in the strategic interest of the European Union, at least. And we have to invest in our security as is European as well. And I strongly disagree with the minister on that. Nobody is saying that European Union should duplicate the efforts of NATO. We are saying that Europeans should be able to provide their own security. If we didn't have enough time, or we were not reasonable to have a wake-up call in 2008 or 14, I think this moment should be the wake-up call for the European Union. We should turn a different page now in our integration process. I think for Europe is important, and this is more to Brussels, but also to the member states, to make it clear. Europe should become from security consumer a security provider, and that's important. Not only to fulfill our obligations of 2% of GDP when it comes to NATO, but also to coordinate our efforts, how to build a resilient civil society, but also how to protect those vulnerable countries which are obviously having aspiration of being part of the Euro-Atlantic cooperation, to say it in a very gentle way.
Thank you. I have also a follow-up question to you. So what you're actually suggesting, as I can imply, is actually that we actually already now create a vision of a more wider Europe, a wider EU, that is actually secures that it's not so cold on the outside. We can actually start warming up to the Western Balkan countries, to the Moldova, to Georgia, to Ukraine, so that because it's also of strategic geopolitical interest of the EU to do that.
Well, to start with Western Balkans, these countries are, historically speaking, they are integral part of Europe. The First World War started from there, the Second World War started from there, and I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be integral part of the European Union. European Union means security, means prosperity, means freedom. And it's better to invest, again, speaking economically, and I don't like this thinking from part of the continent, but I wanna emphasize here. Even speaking economically, it's cheaper to pay for security before the war than after the war. And for those countries having aspiration to be part of the Euro-Atlantic cooperation, I don't see any reason why we should stop their aspiration of becoming part of the COP. And let's put it very simple. What do we have? We have assertive China. What is China? China is not a just country. China is an empire, Han Chinese. We have Russia with population of 150 million and geographically speaking bigger than European Union. And we have, of course, strong American state, be it federal, that gives them opportunity to take decisions quicker than European Union. And having all those three pillars, where's the European Union? What is the aim of the European Union? Obviously, to play a global role. And if we want to play that global role, we have to be ready for the 21st century. All those institutions where we sit in Brussels are fit for the 20th century, not for the 21st century. In order to make them really reshaped for the 21st century, we have to take bold decisions.
But now I'm going to be the critical voice because I have spoken to several Danish parliamentarians on this issue, and they would say, well, what about the Copenhagen criteria? What about the compliance with rule of law, governance institutions, all these things? We have now waited and waited for the Western Balkans to actually comply, and where are we at this moment? And what about democracy? Democracy is deteriorating in Serbia, in Bosnia to some degree. Can we really let them in? We look at what's going on in Hungary, and we sort of regret ever letting them in. All these problems, should we just close our eyes to that?
I'm the last person who is going to say that we have to abolish the high democratic standards. On the contrary, Hungary was a democratic state, is still a democratic state, and Orban was democratic prime minister sitting in our group. Let me remind you that. And then he wanted to be with the man of power called Angela Merkel, and he moved to EPP. And then he was expelled by EPP. So democracy and rule of law and the fundamental rights are eroding in Ukraine, in Hungary, pardon me. We have some warring tendencies in Poland as well. And because of that, European Union decided to have the safeguard for democratic principles and rule of law every year on annual basis. Based on clear benchmarks, we have a clear roadmap and implementation of that roadmap by the European Commission. Where is the rule of law? How free are the judges? What kind of decisions are taken? Where is the role of the media? How free is the society? And this is the annual report done objectively by the experts in European Commission, and the report is voted by the European Parliament. Same goes to the accession countries. We have new methodology now, the so-called the French methodology. The first cluster, previously we had the chapters, now we have the cluster. The first cluster starts with rule of law, and the last cluster ends with rule of law. So this gives enough certainty to those skeptical member states that rule of law as a precondition, the precondition, will be there until the very last moment of the accession countries. And once they enter the club, the rule of law stays as a fundamental issue, and they will be monitored by individual professional experts by European Commission.
Thank you. So now the time has come to Ambassador of Georgia, Nata.
Very interesting reflections here from my colleague speakers. And I am born in Latvia. So my grandmother was Latvian. So I relate very, very closely, and I lived 7 years of my childhood in Latvia. When Soviet Union collapsed, it was to some extent because of a very strong independence movement in Georgia, where my country set an example how we should resist and how we should fight for our independence at the time. And then it collapsed. We were all more or less in the same country, the similar history of annexation and all that stories. Yet, Baltic states had very good friends in Nordic countries, so they were picked and supported by help of all the Nordic countries and some others, of course, but so they were helped to become EU members right away and NATO members very soon. Not because they were any more fitted or because there was more political interest in that, and they had maybe more historical connections to this region, so that Georgia didn't have any such supporter. We were somewhere in between Russia, Turkey, whatever, unclear. But we felt very strongly that we are Europeans. We have always fought to be Europeans. We have hundreds of years of history of attempting to become a member of EU. We are the Christian country which is bordering Turkey and Azerbaijan, and an almost last Christian country between Europe and Asia, so to say. So for us, it was extremely part of our identity. We wanted to be part of that. It didn't happen. Then what happened is we started to build democratic society or to strengthen our values, because values are the same. Make no mistake. Don't think that Copenhagen criteria are the only criteria in the world. There are principles and values which are stronger than all the criteria in the world, because these are fundamental freedoms, this is human rights. These are all issues which underpin Copenhagen criteria as well. Now, to be able to become a member of the EU, you need to comply fully with Copenhagen criteria. But to start that process and to become a candidate, which can last many years, it's not a short process. You can strive to meet the Copenhagen criteria step by step and develop. And believe me, European Union has never had a stronger instrument in hand to promote democracy around its borders. And by promoting democracy, you also promote security, which is important for the region, not just for Georgia, but for the European Union as well. So what we believe is that instead of pushing us back and telling us, comply to that criteria, in the meantime, the guy bulldozers us with tanks and destroys people, and I have out of a 3.7 million country, I have 500,000 homeless people ethnically discriminated and expelled from their homes and living in nowhere. And everybody watching it and telling me about Copenhagen criteria, this is not good enough. We have to, if we stand for those values and those criteria, we should have reacted in 2008, and we should have been supported even before that when we shed our blood for democracy. Many people died in Georgia for freedom and independence from the Soviet Union. But then it was just not so interesting targets for them. So, in honesty, I know I'm passionate, and maybe as a diplomat I'm not supposed to be, but I am, I have worked with the United Nations almost all my professional life, and so I am very strong on the sense of justice and human rights and all that. So what I think is that we need to look at this security as not just nation security. It cannot be only nation security, because when Georgia was invaded in 2008, before that, we knew we would be invaded. We were told we would be invaded. Putin said that he planned it long years back. So we were having Americans coming, training our army, our soldiers. We had a very well-equipped, small, very well-trained army, which withheld Russian tanks for 5 days. Imagine this little country, 5 days under Russian attack, military, before the European Union of 20th century was making up its mind what to do, who to go, what kind of facilitation to make. We were fighting, and our people were dying there for their freedoms. And had we not had that nation power, we would not have existed, because Russia came there to take Tbilisi, not just 20% of our territory. But these 5 days were critical and saved us, and then presidents of Latvia and Estonia and Poland and so on, they came and stood on the Freedom Square with us, and that stopped Putin. So that support meant a lot for survival of state of Georgia, even though 20% is occupied. We are immensely grateful for that, but we also know that it could have been avoided. In the 2008 summit, they were just granting us membership action plan to become NATO member. Instead, they said Georgia and Ukraine will become members of NATO. Putin said, we shall see. And then in a few months, he invaded. So it was just not wise strategic move from the European Union. And that's why, for the European Union to be more secure, you have to have also secure environment. You shouldn't have frustrated people and deteriorating states near you, which are scared of this all ethnical conflicts which are generated by big neighbors. But we should have as much democracy as possible. So instead of pushing us back and saying, no, you are not yet ready, so don't pollute our crystal clear territory here. Instead, help us to become better. We want to take responsibility. We want to work on that. We want to demonstrate to you that we are not less good than you are, and we are not having less values than you have. But we are in the circumstances, we are under constant threat that we can't really move forward. Any step forward, you are pushed back. Every day it takes more border of the territory. It's 40 kilometers from capital that Putin is standing there. So for us, becoming a member of the EU is not giving us military protection, but it is holding him back from invading us. And from that point of view, we believe that membership in the EU is also protection. Membership in NATO is also protection. And the longer we are kept away, at a piece of Russia, mind you. Russia was sort of informally vetoing us and Ukraine to become members of NATO, and nobody else. And it was the other countries that listened to Russia more than to others. So it's not fair. We are small, we are little, and we are playing hard between big guys, making deals and all that. And mind you, with all respect and big support to Ukraine and Moldova for getting candidate status, when Georgia didn't get candidate status in the June decision of the European Commission, which had nothing to do with our merit and performance. Our indicators are better than Ukraine's and better in Moldova in many instances. So we have our own problems, we know them, we deal with them, but we were not the worst one to be excluded. But okay, it happened. What it brings to us, it makes us more vulnerable. It is a signal to Putin that, okay, Georgia can still be a playground for your exercises here and there, and nobody is going to really oppose you if you invade Georgia. That's how Georgian people saw it. And you know what? Georgian people said they don't want us. They will never take us. We work hard, we try. So instead of keeping that enthusiasm, keeping that reforms going, consolidating this achievement and progress towards democracy, sending a very clear message to Putin that this country is not going to be left alone, thanks to Denmark for not leaving us behind. I think we are losing ground and our people are losing hope, and they say, oh, these Europeans, they always look at us as third-class citizens, and we are not third-class citizens. We are ancient civilization. We have been number one in many things that Europe values. We have our culture, we have our unique language, we have our unique script, a lot of things which we can bring to the diversity of Europe. So let us in, let us be part of you rather than us being hijacked by the big power which we as a 3.7 million nation just cannot resist. So for us it is very important to have our own national security forces as strong as possible, but it is also very important for us to be affiliated and be friends with all those countries who collectively create a security umbrella for us. And us being safe also makes you safe. So we depend on each other, and I think that's important.
Yeah, just a comment. Honestly, for me, I'm mostly concerned about Georgia. In all the European states, Georgia is the country in terms of Russian aggression that concerns me the most, because if Russia wants a distraction from the bad war, the bad success in Ukraine, they will use Georgia. Yeah, it's easy, so I understand your concern very much in this sense. But I also know that the reason why the EU said that there were still some things to go is actually the polarization in the parliament between and the way that the parliamentary you could say governance is going about, and there is also a degree, maybe, and I don't know whether I'm right, but that's what I understand, a degree of state capture by one person, who is also very critically acclaimed by civil society because he has not vocally come out against Russia's aggression in that sense. So of course there's a lot of things going on, but on the big picture, I think I agree very much with the fact that at the moment, to me, Georgia is the most vulnerable, and therefore, this is where EU, as well as NATO, should have all its attention in order of deterrence. But again, a bit back, because actually EU plays a role as a security provider in Georgia. How do you see that?
It does, very strong role, and these days we are not talking only about military operation, isn't it? We are talking about cybersecurity. There's a hybrid war going on. There is a propaganda. There is disinformation. There are many other things in which European Union has quite relevant programs and projects, and I believe they are part of the security arrangement. So from that point of view, even Georgia, not being European Union member, has been part of the European even military, whatever operations that European Union has conducted, and we have done the same for NATO forces, etc. So we try to show that we are loyal to those both institutions, and we want to be member, and we play it fair and honest. Now, we strongly believe that have we been having even candidate status or membership action plan with NATO earlier, we would not have been invaded, even though Russia was threatening that, but we wouldn't have been invaded. And I think we still continue. I mean, we might be upset, we might be disappointed, but we are people in civilization which has survived many thousands years, and we have been attacked by Mongols and Turks and so on, and Russians, and so from that point of view, we survived because we have strong spirit for survival. So we will continue to fight, we will continue to reform, we will continue to address those recommendations of European Commission in which our shortcomings are indicated, as we have done in the past years, and our track record of reform is very high and very good. So we will address them, but we need, you have to have two to dance tango. So that's what we need.
Maybe for the audience out there in the virtual things, and I just want to also make a recommendation for a fantastic book that also gives a picture of, you could say, Georgian history and how it's connected actually to Europe, which is called the eighth, the ottende rum.
The Eighth Life.
The Eighth Life,
Brilka.
yeah, the Eighth Life, and it's by Nino
Gatis,
and it's translated to Denmark. It's a fantastic book,
Yeah.
and if you want to get an impression of everything here. But I think actually what we will do now is actually open the floor for comments and questions, and there's a microphone going about here, so if there's any questions. You have one? Yeah, I'm happy that you have a question. Yeah, or a comment?
A comment. I will introduce myself again. Constantin Dedu. I represent Volunteer Europe Network, Imago Mundi Youth Organization, but also Radio Romania. I have more hats like all of us probably. I would like to comment on a few things that all of you said. One of them being that it costs less to prevent a war than actually to pay after it for all the costs that arise. You mentioned about the Copenhagen criteria while Madam Ambassador was stating the fact that there's kind of a, this is how I feel it, a kind of a bitterness related to the fact that some EU dissidents maybe don't see exactly the importance of Georgia in the bigger scheme of things. And I would like to say some things first, like, well, Europe is imperfect, and it will continue to be imperfect. And sometimes it's not the games, it's not the rules that make the game, it's the game that makes the rules. And I want to explain myself. Let's imagine, because you mentioned earlier about Hungary and about Turkey who have some problems, some issues. There was a mentioning about different countries from the Balkans. Let's imagine, for example, that Hungary, with Orban making a bit of a mess and whatever, but also let's not forget that some of the biggest investors in Hungary are states like Germany or France with huge stakes in there. So let's imagine, for example, that Hungary was not in the EU and it was not in NATO. Think of the refugee crisis a few years ago, and think about the fact that I come from Romania. Think about the fact that more than 1 million people have passed through Romania and went on further on their journeys, either to reunite with families all across Europe or to find shelter and refuge in Denmark, northern countries and so on. What would have happened if at the Romanian-Hungarian border, while on the other side Serbia is good friends with Russia or trying to be, you know, in between? Let's imagine that this 1 million and something would not have had the possibility to go further, and all the tension would have come on Romania. Let's imagine, for example, that Turkey would have never gotten the candidate status for the EU, and that links with Erdogan, as complicated as they are today, would not have existed. What would have happened with the Turkey who would have fell victim to, or not victim, but would have been ruled by a fundamentalist Islamic regime, or if Turkey would have unilaterally denounced the Montreal Convention that prohibits and regulates how warships travel through the Bosphorus, and if, for example, Russian warships would have been free to go to Syria and do whatever they want there. So what I want to say by this is that in times of crisis, rules need to change. Because I used Hungary and Turkey as potential examples. What would have happened with these two countries in other contexts that I just explained could very well happen in the future with other countries from the Balkans or Georgia who don't do their homework well. Well, one thing I want to say in the end, there are lots of countries within Europe that are very corrupt. For example, one surprise of mine as a Romanian that I found out once that Belgium and the Netherlands are the countries with the biggest tax evasion, and I was very surprised. I said, why? Why not us the first, knowing our background on corruption? So the fact is that sometimes when you get somebody into a club, you can change things faster and increase what's happening with that person than if you leave it waiting out the door. So this should be something to food of thought for Georgia, and for Danish people it should be understood somehow that Europe and Denmark in itself, as a member of a select club for many decades, are victims of their own success. If a company is small, it has a few employees, it needs to care of those employees and of that basis of customers. Yeah. In a very prosaic way, if Europe is bigger and if Denmark as part of this club is richer, this comes with additional worries and concerns, and we can't just turn the eye on that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think I would like to take this question to Ilhan, because what I also think is when you have a crisis that we have at the moment, like we need to rethink Europe, and you can use this crisis just as we during the Second World War, we had the San Francisco meeting on the establishing the UN, and we're ready for the time that the war actually ended and we could create a new world order. And the same time, this crisis that we have, or this conflict, this terrible war, could it be used, and could it be on the initiative of the European Parliament to actually have a sort of a meeting, a conference on how to chart the future, the vision of Europe? Because as Gorbachev said in '89 in the Council of Europe, he said, we have to create a European house from the Ural Mountains to the transatlantic sea. And otherwise, he said, it will be anarchy. So somehow we have not created this European house. We have only partly created a European house. We have not become the peace project that we were supposed to be. We have become a project which is actually dividing nations and not providing the security that we could. Is there any discussions within the European Parliament on these sort of, you could say, more visionary and future, and how should peace look like actually when it comes?
How should peace look like? And I would add, with peace should come prosperity, and in between probably, or before that, the security. But we had a big discussion about the vision of European Union, and usually your colleagues are asking me, how do I envisage the European Union in the next decades? I don't answer as I was answering previously. I want to see it bigger, I want to see it smaller. I think we need to see European Union more efficient. More efficient when it comes to deliveries here in European Union, delivering to the 27 EU member states. And it's a shame that for already 7 years, such an important dossier like the migration one, I know that I'm putting a toxic point here in Denmark while we are discussing migration and foreign affairs. But sitting in the European Council, we were not able to take a decision. And the crisis is coming. More migrants are coming. I see it from my own country, Bulgaria. A lot of people are crossing the border between Bulgaria and Turkey. And we will have again the same problem. We'll have Europe divided, we'll have Europe a la carte, and this will be used by the opponents of the European idea. This will be used by Putin and his friends, be it Orban, be it Vucic, be it some others, sitting around the table, and they will point on us that we are weak. We cannot afford weakness any longer when it comes to the European Union. There is a big discussion about how we should deepen the European Union, and I'm completely in favor of that. We should reform European Union in order to make it reshaped, in order to make it fit for the 21st century. We have to make big reforms in the European institutions, but at the same time, we have to enlarge the European Union. And having said that, I don't mean that we have to give the green card tomorrow to Georgia, Ukraine, North Macedonia, Albania, whatever country. We should give them the key. We should give them the key and aspiration that one day, after a long way of fulfilling the Copenhagen criteria, and here I'm 100% with the ambassador. What kind of Copenhagen criteria today Ukraine is fulfilling? They are paying every day with their blood, with their soul. What kind of Copenhagen criteria Georgia was fulfilling in 2008? I mean, we shouldn't expect those countries who paid for their own freedom, prosperity, security, for their own lives, by their own blood, just to be bureaucratic and technocratic, checking the boxes from one dossier to another dossier. That's for later. Now it's important that we give a political message. And the message is clear. We want you in because your aspiration is to be part of the co-op. A co-op brings security, brings prosperity, brings freedom. We are the peace project and we want to build the peace project back, because Europe is not peace now. Europe is at war. And we have to find a way to transmit this message to the European societies. In some countries, for historical reasons, it's easier. In some, it's more difficult. But we'll take time. But for some issues, we just don't have time. We have to react now. Tomorrow will be late. And those bullies are not waiting for us, not waiting for the bureaucrats sitting in the European Commission to make the next tick. They just act without asking us. They're not afraid of confrontation. They don't care about values. They care about their own interests and the new territories. And we see this every day.
And Mr. Eglitis, what commentary do you have in terms of this thinking around security and the European Union from the Latvian, from your perspective, but from perspective of Latvia as well?
Yeah, I think it's important to note that for the last 22 years, basically, Putin regime is a bit like a tumor which has been growing in this long time in the so-called body of Europe, and in Russia as a state has done everything in its power to diminish European project by all means, you know, through media, through direct involvement in political processes in certain countries, building alliances with strongmen of Europe. We know the names. So basically, Russia has done everything in the last 20 years, basically, to work against our European common project, and also corrupting some of the Western countries. We know, for instance, these gas links. You know, Germany has in the past 20 years, you know, become super reliant, and their political elites being friendly to Russia. But what we are seeing now is basically because of our really courageous Ukrainian people, that I think there is happening already, but there will definitely be more cleansing of this Russian influence, and this influence is in many countries through different means. I know my own country, we are taking steps now we are taking steps that should have been taken 15-20 years ago, but we are doing it now, and I think also other countries are reflecting upon themselves. But in EU level, I think it's very important to understand. Okay, you have this Copenhagen criteria, whatever, but really it's about who is leading Europe, who are the leaders, who are the visionaries, and I mean, for a long time we had Angela Merkel basically more or less deciding where we will go, right? Because whatever Angela said, most of this, okay, yeah, we agree. Now, and interestingly enough, that Putin invaded right after Angela left. So who are the leaders? Who are the brave leaders of Europe who will shape the course that others will follow? Right? And I must say, I'm very impressed with our President of the European Commission, von der Leyen. I'm very impressed with the President of the European Parliament, Metsola. They are brave, they are courageous, and I hope we will have also national leaders from the big parties, big countries also taking up the burden. And unfortunately, in Germany, I don't see that happening, but we will see. So I think it's important to see who is actually the leader of Europe shaping up.
And now a very difficult question, because I lived 2 years in Moscow from 86 to 88 during Soviet times. I've lived in Latvia actually from 92 to 93, and I traveled extensively to all of the countries. But do you think, now in Latvia there's a lot of people who has fled from Russia. do you believe that Russia ever will become democratic, and should we create an EU in which they could actually integrate? Or what do you know? And maybe we'll take a quick round, starting with you, Mr. Eglitis, and then quick, because then after this we'll have to close.
Sure. I think we should do everything in our common power to make sure that Russia at some point becomes a normal state, you know, and Ukrainians are doing the big brunt of the job now. I mean, they are really defending Europe, defending our values, and I believe that the Putin regime will crumble. It's not sustainable. We will see how long it will take, but we have to do everything possible now to support Ukrainian people, Ukrainian economy, very important. So it's, of course, military. But the regime will crumble. It's not sustainable, definitely. They have, like in poker, Putin has basically put in everything, you know, it's all the stake, all the money, cash in. But his bluff will be called, and it's called now. Basically, we are seeing what's happening now. They are failing. Thanks God, Russia is a corrupt state, and we see it now in their military. It's crap. You know, they're ineffective, and thank God so. What I don't like sometimes in European debates, especially in Western Europe, they say, well, we should be careful who will come after Putin, you know, maybe it's somebody worse. Don't think that way.
Putin is the worst.
He's the worst. There's no way you can beat him, you know, there's no way. Anyone who will be after has to be better. So, and that's why these links actually for a long time were developed by Western leaders, saying, well, we should, you know, we should care for stability of Russia, you know, and then Putin ensures stability. So, and we don't know who will be the next, you know. This is bullshit. I'm sorry to say.
I totally agree, but yeah. Good. But so you, in the event where you think we should at some point reach out and try to support a democratic transition in Russia?
Absolutely. I think a lot of people in Russia, they're super scared, and that's normal, you know, because this is a very, very oppressive regime we are talking about. You know, there is no freedom whatsoever at all levels. But once these big changes happen, you know, there will be people who will want, Russian people, they will want to live normal democratic life.
And Mr. Ilhan?
Well, depends what is democratic standard. If you have the democratic standard as we think for European country, I doubt anytime soon Russia will be democratic democratic country. But I don't think is it the right approach to close the door for all those dissidents and people struggling and fighting as well for freedom and civil liberties in Russia. And we know many of them in Kasyanov's party, in Yabloko, in other political or non-partisan organizations. There are individuals struggling for European values, obviously. And we should do everything in our toolbox to support them. I don't have any other answer than that. There is the only way to help those democratic individuals in Russia. We've been debating many times the theory of changing the regime from inside. I don't believe it. I mean, having read a lot about Russia and the history of Russia, I don't feel optimistic if somebody from outside wants to impose political process inside Russia.
And Mrs. Ambassador?
Yeah, I think that at the moment, because all the red lines have been crossed and because there is so much of bloodshed, including obviously Ukraine at the moment, but also some others, I believe that at this point in time, it is a responsibility of international democratic community to show that there is a line beyond which things are not acceptable. And these lines should not be traded for either oil or other things, you know. There are things which should be accepted as not acceptable. And for that, you need to continue standing and sending very consistent, ideally coordinated message between all the parties, and do a lot of work to prepare your societies in Europe to understand what's going on and why it is not acceptable and why should everybody do their bit in accepting the consequences of this positioning. So that means that Russia will have to go down before it goes up. Now, how long it will take to go down will very much depend also how the external pressures will be on Russia and how bad it will become. I agree with my fellow speaker here that Russians can tolerate a lot and they can be patient and they can have nothing and live without nothing and still survive. So we shouldn't count to a very quick transformation of Russian society. But Russia has brilliant people, Russia has right people, and Russia has people who don't like what is going on. So I think those people require support for them to do their job, because no country from outside can do that job. So it may take a long time, and it is not yet the time to support Russia to become democratic, because it's not ready for that. But there will be time which will come when these people will raise, and there will be critical mass of them, and they will move people. And I believe that Russia does have future, but it may take generational change, and not one generation perhaps, but we have to be patient for that. But until then, Russia's hands must be tied not to shed any more extra drop of blood of anybody outside Russia.
Thank you so much. What I hear is that Russia needs a major defeat.
Yes.
And then only then there can come reflection in terms of growing. So thank you so much to the panelists. I think we had a great debate, a very important debate. And thank you to all of you for listening. And yes, so this will be my final moderation here in this stage. We didn't have so much climate, we had security, but I hope you forgive us. So give the panelists a great hand.
Thank you. Thank you.